Hello and greetings from Paris. So we are joining you today from France for your lunch break, and I hope that you're all enjoying a lunch that would rival with the absolutely splendid French gastronomy. So today we are joining the JSOU Future of Soft Forum from Paris, but also I have a panelist from the Bordeaux region and a panelist from beautiful Brittany. So my name is Emilie Cleret. I head the English Studies Department for French Higher Military Education, and I'm joining you today from École de Guerre, the French War College. I will be moderating a panel that will aim at giving a French soft perspective on support to resistance and resilience. It's an honor for me to welcome on this panel Lieutenant Colonel Luigi, who's right here with me. Hello.
Good evening.
He is the International Relations Officer for the French SOCOM. My second panelist is Colonel Lance, who is the active commanding officer of one of the French Special Forces units specialized in behind the lines and covert operations, which with expertise in humans. Welcome, Colonel Lance.
Yeah, hello, everyone.
And last but not least, the final words will go to Commander Bruno, who has just finished his 2 years as commanding officer of Commando Hubert, the French equivalent of a Navy SEALs unit. Welcome, Commander Bruno.
Hello.
So let's dive right in. I will first turn to you, Lieutenant Colonel Luigi. So you are known within the French SOF community for your wealth of knowledge in military history, and especially in the history of French SOF. Some members of the audience today might not know the history of support to resilience and resistance in the French context. So I think it would be very valuable to frame this conversation with some key historical landmarks. So the common belief is very often that the crucible of these types of operations was World War II. So could you extend on that for us?
First of all, thank you very much for the kind words. First of all, after saying this, what we can say is about during the Second World War, before the Normandy landings, these types of missions were given to a French organization called the Bureau Central de Renseignement et d'Action, the Central Bureau for Intelligence and Action. This was during World War II, the Intelligence and Covert Operations Organization for the Free French, or La France Libre, as it was then known. The BCRA then evolved into the Direction Générale des Services Spéciaux, the Directorate for Special Services. This directorate was the result of the merging of the Central Bureau for Intelligence and Action based in London and the French intelligence services based in Algiers. Okay, so these types of missions were also given to the two branches of the British Special Operations Executive operating in France. One branch having no contact with the France Combattante, that was the new name of the Free French from July 1942 on, and which was poaching, if I can say so, French agents from the France Combatant pool, which in turn led to frictions between the French and the British. It was known as the SOE Section F. The other branch was coordinating with the fighting French, and it was known as SOE Section RF. Last but not least, missions to support resistance movements were also given to trilateral efforts, such as the Sussex Plan or the Jedburgh teams that were composed in France of French and either UK or US teams of agents for the Sussex Plan, or special force operators for the Jedburgh teams. We can say the same about the situation in Southeast Asia with a unit which was called Force 136, which was also under the lead of the SOE. The French members of Force 136 operated in Indochina in 1944-45, mostly after the Japanese attack against French position of 9 March 1945. Before that date, and since 1940, the Japanese had been officially stationed but not occupying French Indochina, which had remained under Vichy French control.
So that's a really interesting point. So am I right to understand that the same pattern was at play in the operations taking place in Southeast Asia?
If we focus on Indochina, yes, the pattern was the same. Force 136, which I mentioned before, under the authority of the Special Operation Executive, worked very well. When French authority was reestablished in Indochina in 1945, initially, the need to support resistance networks behind enemy lines was not recognized. Once the Viet Minh guerrilla became a regular army in the early 1950s, it became once again a relevant option to create resistance networks in the rear of the Viet Minh lines. What the French called Viet Minh is what the US would call Viet Cong later on. Thus, under the auspices of the Service for Foreign Intelligence Collection and Counterintelligence, in French, the Service de Documentation Extérieure et de Contre-Espionnage, known by its acronym of SDEC, the GCMA were created in 1951. The GCMA, Groupement Commando Mixte Aéroporté in French, or Joint Airborne Commando Units, were tasked with organizing and leading in combat a series of various mountain tribes that the Viet Minh considered as inferior races and treated appallingly. Those ethnic minorities from Indochina and China, some of those tribes were the Hmongs, the Thais, the Nung, the Meo, the Lao, or the Jarai, proved to be excellent fighters. They managed to immobilize tens of thousands of Viet Minh soldiers in the north of what is now Vietnam, forces that could not be used against French regular units in other parts of the country. They thus played an operative role which far exceeded the small investment in men and equipment the SDEC invested in the GCMA. As you know, the US SOF used many of those same tribes during the Vietnam War, but mostly as strike forces or for deep reconnaissance operation, usually run by Mike V. Sog, rather than to support resistance movements in communist North Vietnam.
So this might be surprising to some, and it certainly is to me, because there's also a common belief that, as I said, World War II was the crucible for French SOF, and that it was French SOF that was providing most of support to resilience and resistance. So could you tell us a bit more about that?
The Free French that were part of the SAS brigade, which was composed of 2 British, 2 French and 1 Belgian regiment, as well as the Jetbird teams, were committed to supporting resistance movements, but only in the final stages of operations, that is after the Normandy landings, and more as a spearhead force than to supervise underground forces on the long term.
So who exactly was tasked with designing and conducting support operations to resilience and resistance movements then?
So during the Second World War, we saw it was the VCRA that became the French Secret Services. And then during the colonial wars until the 2000s, the task is mainly given to the Secret Services, the Service for Foreign Intelligence Collection and Counterintelligence, which initially was known as DEC and later became the DGSE, its current name. Why is that? It's because they conduct clandestine operations with drastic operational security.
So when exactly did the French SOF come into play to support resilience and resistance?
If you look at the operations in Libya in 2011, this is the very first clear action where French SOF operations were seen as officially providing support to resistance movement under the direct command of the French SOCOM. The French government clearly demonstrated its support to this operation. This was about supporting and supervising armed factions in the context of kinetic warfare, facing other armed factions in a rather permissive environment. This is far different from what we were describing earlier, that is occupied territories, denied access or very controlled access, and long-term supervision of resistance pockets in given territories with refuge areas.
So what do these operations actually tell us about support to resilience and resistance?
A resistance movement is the military extension of a political movement. Supporting a resistance is, even if indirectly, supporting a political goal, which are not initially very clear. They may at some point turn out to be dangerous or against our interests or values.
So are there situations where the political dimension is more important than in any others when it comes to supporting resilience and resistance?
If the country where the resistance movement is in action is totally occupied and its government is in exile, the political dimension of the resistance movement becomes a key item in the equation, especially if the resistance movement is a major source for intelligence. For example, before the Normandy landings of June 1944, the French BCRA, the Central Bureau for Intelligence and Action, offered considerable leverage to General de Gaulle when discussing with allies. If ever de Gaulle had decided to cut access to that source of intelligence because of differences over, for example, the administration of France after its liberation, allies would have suffered much higher casualties in their operations in France due to a lack of knowledge and understanding of the enemy.
So would you say that we have seen over the years different types of support to resistance and resilience?
Supporting a resistance to the Nazi regime or communism does not need to be justified. It is self-evident, and it even is viewed as a form of necessary romantic sacrifice by many. But supporting a faction against another in a fragmented or failed state is far more complex and will inevitably carry the seeds of future issues, may that resistance movement succeed or not.
So what consequences are there to supporting resistance and resilience then?
Committing to supporting resistance cannot come without consequences. Withdrawal before full victory would be considered as abandonment and will cause long-term damage to the relation with the resistance group. And any violation of human rights by resistance movement will come to haunt supporting nations. Resilience should, in theory, be easier to support, but the appetite for preparedness and frugality is almost non-existent in our Western societies. Enforcing such an agenda would be a very tall order for democratic government, especially in a fractured and multicultural societies where the notion of the common good is open to interpretation. In my opinion, only Finland and the Baltic countries are taking resilience seriously nowadays.
So there's another thing I think is important to talk about when we talk about resistance and resilience is geography. So is there any geography that would prevent effective support to resistance?
In the French experience, not all geography is favorable to resistance. Areas difficult to access, fragmented terrains are considered more favorable, but they can also lead to the development of a biased perception of security and therefore trigger tragedies like in the Vercors Mountains in southern France during the summer of 1944, where the overconfidence of the local Maquis commander led to a backlash by the German forces. The ground and airborne counterattack, which with the far superior forces, left 900 French resistance fighters and civilians killed and a traumatized area, which still questions why the local resistance movements were not better supported more than half a century later.
So if I gather my thoughts about everything you said, so there's something clear that appears, which is intelligence versus action. So what has the most impact out of the two?
Once again, in the French experience, intelligence networks usually have far more impact on the enemy than factions that deliver actions. Action will provide local results and usually generates retaliation against the population. In some cases, backlash from the occupying forces can be a desired effect to generate further mobilization of the population against the occupier. One classic example is the assassination of SS Commander Heydrich in Prague by a Czech agent from the SOE in May 1942. This led in turn to the extermination and deportation of the inhabitants of the village of Lidice as an act of retaliation. This event showed the world that Czechoslovakia was resisting, something which had not been necessarily obvious to all before that momentous event.
So now that we've had a good outline of the historical context, what challenges do you see today that we did not see in the past?
Mostly the challenges are technological. The new technologies make clandestine operations extremely complex and costly. Instant communication systems and social media can undermine support to a resistance movement in just a few hours, thanks to the dissemination of fake information, publicity given to war crimes, or by a mistake made in the use of social media. Also, our Western way of life, a full shift to the service sector, the pursuit of comfort, the absence of military service or reserve call-ups, or the simple ability to use weapons, which is fast vanishing with the extinction of hunting in Western Europe, would make the organization of resistance action far more difficult today than in the past.
So I think the description of the challenges that you draw from looking at history is a perfect transition to the points that Colonel Lance wants to make. So Colonel Lance, thank you for joining us. So we know that you won't be switching on your camera today for anonymous, to remain anonymous. So in our recent conversations, Colonel Lance, I was fascinated to discuss what you often refer to as the fact that SOF is now going back to the future. So could you extend a bit further on what you mean by that?
Yes, of course, Emilie. And first of all, I just want to thank a lot the Joint Special Operations University to bring me in your forum in this very interesting topic, and because JSOU is a strong reference for any special operations officers. So thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity to explain a few things. Yes, Back to the Future. So Back to the Future, a great movie, but no strong reality for special operations. I would say that good old tricks never lie. Meaning by that new and future challenges naturally bring us back to fundamentals of special operations, fundamentals of our tactics. Whether it is operating in total blackout operations behind enemy lines, as soon, and I think it's important, as soon as we assume our resolute commitments in a high intensity and symmetric conflicts. And we know that with the great state competition, this is an eventuality that we need to be prepared to. Whether it's for that or also for extending our covert intelligence and influence actions among local populations while managing the disruptive technologies that we are now able to put on the market.
So yes, you want to add?
Yeah, please go.
Yeah, so thank you for those points. So would you say that, again, within the outline that you've just drawn, is there a specific French model to what you've just described?
I wouldn't have the arrogance to say that there is a specific French model in what we describe, because I think that this model is a common one that had been rooted especially during World War II, where we had been able, so as my friend Luigi very smartly described, we have been able to merge different ways to do this kind of special operations with the American way of operating, the English one, the French one, the Belgian one, etc. But what is sure is that history in the 50s, in the 60s, in the French commando and after special operations community proved that we developed a very interesting capacity in guerrilla warfare and also counterinsurgency. I would say that this is also going back to the colonial era, where we always try to give to the military, to the officer, and at this stage, special operations were not existing, but in the way they operate, it was special operations. This social and this local effort for any kind of operation we were making. So this is the social role that was talking Maréchal Lyoté about colonial operations in North Africa, for instance.
So if I'm not mistaken, so there's been an important focus for French SOF on counterterrorism for about the past 20 years. So could you extend on that point for us, please?
Yes, of course. So yeah, the CT, the counterterrorism effort, I would describe it as a natural and probably the best maturation of high spectrum special operations. The CT effort allowed us to significantly increase our capacities for autonomous actions, but also it allows us to develop extremely complex tactics to meet a clear and simple political goal. But also it allows us to extend our competencies to mastering the integration of special operations in the global markets of diplomatic stakes, multi-agencies integration, and strong coalitions. The shift that is now being operating brings in more complexity because a holistic interagency coordination enters the equation in addition to further more fine-tuned coordination with many other services, intelligence agencies, cybersecurity agencies, and so on. So this makes the reinforcement of an international alliances of SOF all the more challenging.
So in this, I feel that what you've just described, in fact, is some kind of a coordination web So in this coordination web, how do you precisely identify threats that have themselves also become compound?
So that's clear that with the new environment we'll have to face with, we are facing the complexity of identifying threats. So we can take, of course, the example of the Wagner society, Russian society. To better identify these kind of threats, we need to operate like them. So to act as a paramilitary when we have to hunt paramilitaries. So to identify them, we have to compound like them through decompartmentalized tools and footprints in order to surprise them in the way they tend themselves to swamp their structure and missions under our vigilance.
So we've discussed this on numerous occasions, and you've mentioned to me what your view as well. What you've mentioned to me is, something that you view absolutely necessary for the future as what you coined unartificial intelligence. So could you explain to us what you mean by this?
Yes, the final answer to that will definitely be the unartificial intelligence. And the unartificial intelligence, I mean by that the crucial role of human intelligence and human spatial reconnaissance. I would say human intelligence at large. Humans is definitely more than ever to be considered as the alpha and the omega of any special operations that we will have to perform in this kind of contested environments, where we will need to drill into the physical and also the human complexity. So the humans is clearly, I think, the tip of the spear of special operations in contested areas. So it will range, of course, from blackout and clandestine special operations behind enemy lines to merging and routing, and this is probably the most important and the less visible one, routing in the very long run into local environments. So I would say that there are some key requirements for future special operations in contested areas where we have to regain agility in. The first one is about being able to totally integrate our preparation of the battlefield. So in terms of educating, in terms of building, in terms of identifying intelligence and influence objectives with other actors, especially diplomatic ones. The second aspect is about cloisoning small detachments and also being able to decentralize any action and any decision to the maximum. So this is what you have in the US as mission command, to have a special operations team leader able to totally integrate at their own level a maximum of decision once they are deployed in a very decentralized way and in a contested environment where their own decision will make the difference. The third point is about accepting the real ungratefulness of long, very long intelligence efforts while progressively routing under the radar in a contested area where you need to build confidence and legitimacy for your presence. It's all about opening progressively strategic accesses to the information. And last but not least is about breaking the natural and the spontaneous tendency to stick to pure sovereign and purely national approaches, because great competitors must, operating against great competitors must unite us much more than ever. Our grandfather in World War II, with the SOE, the French section of SOE, with the resistance, they opened the way naturally because of the common sense of that greatest challenge. So I think that will be one of the key difficulties we'll have to face too, is how to build special operations in a coalition dynamic against great competitors and with human intelligence at the tip of this, I would say, in the foremost of this of our efforts, while bringing intelligence agencies and while breaking the national and the sovereignty tendencies.
So thank you very much for that. And I think now, having listened to you, the audience understands why I love having these conversations with you. So thank you very much, Colonel Lance. We'll be back, I'm sure, to you in a minute with some questions. But I will now turn to Commander Bruno to get a view on these issues from a more maritime view and what this could look like for a contested maritime theatre. So we have some slides ready for you, Commander Bruno, so we'll bring them up. The tech team will, that's it, wonderful. First, Commander Bruno, could you give us your definition of the topic and a few historical landmarks in your community?
Yeah, thank you, Emilie. So I will indeed start from the topic definition, then go through historical, then current and future consideration in order to suggest from my personal point of view, what could be the conditions for SOF to be an alternative to traditional, should I say, conventional use of force, and to push a campaign plan and achieve gains in military and non-military domains. So, speaking of the topic, there are 4 words I find interesting, so slide 2. That's going from resilience to resistance. In resilience, you have the idea of permanent backward, loss of balance. That's always reacting to something, although appropriately, but still struggling to set your pace to the enemy. As opposed to resistance, that underlies the idea of initiative, freedom of movement, and still blocking the enemy in its action. All within a local strategy. Very interesting, because being one with a local partner is accepting to make concessions. For example, for the first time in SOF history, in developing a campaign plan, we'll have to start from somebody else's desired end state, and not ours. And all under a permanent threat of peer competitors. This is a major change too, because until now, we've rarely been challenged in our ability to last on the field and operate from our FOB, although the sea is today the most disputed environment. So we have to be prepared to the idea that the more we'll raise our heads from now, the more we'll lose our freedom of maneuver and freedom of movement. So speaking of the time when SOF weren't the biggest fish in the sea, we can switch to slide 3. With I identified 3 main eras and the related characteristic. So not very different from the 2 previous speakers, but regarding World War II, I won't repeat what has been said, but about the small to big warfare, decentralization and subsidiarity are the key. High risk acceptation, low footprint, being very adaptive, joint strategies. And I can refer to the state of the art of naval special operation, and should I say special operation, Operation Frankton, that's on the upper left corner. Switching to national conflicts, in addition to all that has been said and written, I must underline the importance of applying the Clausewitzian Trinity, not only to us, but to our local partners, in order to judge the sustainability and the issue of the partnership. Basically, during the colonial war, there has been no viable substitute from our side in the locals providing government or any sort of governance standing for accountability. There has been no viable substitute from us to a genuine support of population that standed for legitimacy. And there hasn't been either no viable substitute from our side in the locals providing a decent, potent, and genuine armed force that stand for capability and effectiveness. So any of the three corners that have been built from us from scratch, that had been built by us from scratch, sorry, showed a non-sustainable end of conflict as soon as we withdraw. Then the teachings of modern asymmetrical conflicts were, to me, the learnings were that there is no conflict anymore, where force is the only domain of confrontation. There is no domain that cannot be used as a weapon in an armed opposition, underlining the spreading of conflict in every human activity. For example, the sea being once again the perfect example of warfare spreading through communication, freedom of movement, trade, resources, and so on. So that underlines the utility of force that will progressively have to move from military domains to less coercive domains to be effective. But still SOF is the military tool able to affect or to access the highest number of non-military domains, so still offering consequent room for maneuver. So then it can be instructive to turn around and think about how we evolved. So that's next slide. As standalone branches, as SOF being standalone branches, competing for resources and missions with each other, but with conventional branches too, duplicating any existing skill or gear existing in their branch, and having as a rule the fact of their footprint growing every day they spend in deployment. The relation to innovation is an issue too. I mean, we evolve quickly in technique, but we evolve much slowly in strategy. So do we have to have technology because it's new or because it helps us crossing a threshold? I mean, SOF are meant to do it differently, not to do it better, faster, and more precisely. They are meant to be different from conventional forces and different from what they did last year. And that's a struggle too. That's a struggle today. Then a consequence of SOF getting bigger and bigger is paradoxically, their common culture is narrowing because of the specialization of operators in what they do best. Basically, what we see today is operators specializing in urban warfare, killer capture operation, hit and run operation, and not maintaining side skills like gathering and synthesizing intelligence, like UMINT, and so on. So at the end of the day, you end up with a constellation of hyper-specialized teams, all thinking in their small little box and performing CrossFit operations, basically perfect, identical moves, perfect, identical operations all day long. So all these tendencies, next slide, challenge our ability to adapt to future operations. I mean, we've started from Daredevil to Juggernaut. So what's next? Do we still bet on brute force, or do we rationalize? Do we go smart? Once again, SOF is not meant to be the way to do better with more. It's meant to be the way to do differently with the same or with less, still better. Are we prepared to adapt to local strategy? Are we agile and flexible enough? Aren't we too big? Is technology a headlong technological rush? I mean, I refer to what Lane said about Back to the Future. It's very, very clever. And at the end of the day, how do we prioritize skills amongst our operators in order to operate more and more technological payload in contested environment, therefore with a minimal footprint? That's what has been said about action versus intelligence. Basically, my idea of that as a commanding officer of Uber was that it was better to have a small number of very versatile operators able to use many payloads, even basically, rather than having multiple experts, multiple geeks deployed to seize the opportunities and thus increasing the footprint. The downside of this being that we had to make the technological payload user-friendly for guys that had to train all day long to maintain what I call access skills, basically to secure the capacity to access your target. So if I sum up all these considerations, so that's last slide, and refer to the topic, which was to evolve hand-to-hand with local forces under a permanent multi-domain threat to perform or to support tactical operation, serving a strategic campaign plan in military and non-military domains, calls for a major change in current SOF format. And the steps to do so could be, first of all, be prepared to identify the local support that meets close vision criteria of sustainability. There is no possible resistance without local support, and no possible cooperation if the local support doesn't meet this close vision criteria. And then precisely identifying their ability, their access points in military and non-military domain, to establish clear and shared end state, and to prepare to generate the abilities that I will need on the ground. Then it can be done by adopting a permanent elusive posture, as said Lance once again. So that's offering minimal attack surface through rationalizing physical and non-physical vulnerabilities. For example, regarding physical attack surface, I think we have to think from scratch the ratio between the back office that provide us the targets, the intelligence, the missing skills, and the task force on the ground. And we have to study how to blend in the local environment, in the local forces. And regarding non-physical vulnerabilities, I am as well fond of digital asceticism, which I think is the best way to compete against an enemy who's as competent as me or even better than me in this field. So this is done to deny focus on force and deny attack options to the competitor. And then finally, it can be done in adopting a smart to big posture, evolution of the small to big posture. That's having the maximum number of skills amongst the minimum number of people. Once again, I think it's better to have polyvalent operators that are able to access discretely disputed areas than operate basic technological payload. It's better than having a high number of geeks that are only able to work in limited fields and under certain conditions. So basically, that's what I could say about the topic in 10 minutes.
Much, Commander Bruno, for your insights. So we are now ready, the French connection, to take any questions if the audience would like to ask about our French perspective. So we have one question. So France rightly sees itself as a global power to include the Indo-Pacific region. How is French SOF evolving its approach for this specific region? So would any of you like to take the question? Or of course, you can all three add some insight into this question. Would you like to start? So Colonel Luigi will start.
Yes, of course, France sees itself as a global power, especially in the Indo-Pacific region, because we have roughly 2 million French nationals living in this region. The way we are adapting our posture regarding this specific region currently is to establish a network of liaison officers to develop our cooperation with the key players in the area, and also to rebalance our efforts that were up to now and for the past 70 years or so dedicated to the area just south of Europe. So there is a repositioning of intelligence, of assets, of manpower, which is at the moment in the making. It is starting small with the liaison and intelligence in order to better understand the area, the players, who's doing what, where we can be the most effective, in what way. And this is part of the global shift that the French SOCOM is going through at the moment, which is to rebalance our equities, not being solely focused on the same area as we've been for a good 15, 20 years now.
So before I move on to give the floor to Colonel Lance and Commander Bruno on this question, I just wanted to follow up on what you said. So my understanding is that France has a long-standing tradition of forward presence of troops. Would you say that that is an asset, that history and that tradition is an asset to developing a further presence in the Indo-Pacific?
Yes, very much so, because first of all, it's for us, for the armed forces, it's a very interesting manpower pool. Our French nationals all over the Pacific are very interested in joining the armed forces, so they bring in a lot of local knowledge, and they are overwhelmingly very good soldiers. So just for that element, I can answer yes to that question. For the rest, we have understood that forward basing was key to some recent successes, especially Operation Serval. Without the forward basing and the very quick reaction of locally based units, even though they were small, the principle is try to put out the fire when it starts rather than wait for it to become too big and then unstoppable.
Thank you. So, Commander Bruno, would you like to add something on the question on the Indo-Pacific?
Yeah, regarding that question of Indo-Pacific and the ability to deploy far away, I'd say that from a SOF perspective, much more than the number of prepositioned forces and the value of our very units, that's the key word here is interoperability. Interoperability, because if you know how to deploy on any frigate crossing this area, if you know how to deploy on any submarine without any support on a submarine crossing in this area, you can do great things and you can do them fast. So I think here, once again, that the key word is interoperability with any existing assets of the Navy or of prepositioned forces.
Thank you. Colonel Lance, would you like to add a point on the question regarding the Indo-Pacific?
No specific point. I think that everything that had to be said on this topic had been said, but just that another advantage of the UMINT as the future of special operations in this kind of contested area as such in Indo-Pacific region is that we can deploy ourselves in very small detachments without any geographical boundaries or unreachable distances. So this area is another and very striking example of how UMINT special operations can merge themselves in the interstices, in the very unconventional and unexpected areas.
So, Colonel Lance, I'm going to keep you on online, Colonel Lance, for the next question, and I'll revolve then back to Commander Bruno and Colonel Luigi. So, Colonel Lance, a question on the Sahel. As France looks to evolve its role and function in the Sahel with the sunset of Opération Barkhane, what lessons from that experience are applicable for resilience and resistance when considering challenges from state-based threats?
Wow, this is $100 question. Yeah, the main lesson for me is there are two lessons. The first one is the sooner you anticipate, the better it will be, because it is a very long-term strategy to try to understand first the complexity of such a specific and very compartmentalized human environment such as Sahel in a very huge place. It's as huge as going from Brest in the western part of France to Moscow in Russia. So you can guess the complexity, the human complexity of the area that needs to go to a human answer. And the human answer in such a big area is an answer that needs to be anticipated to the maximum because it will take time. And having the time for that is not always the same time that our political and our military, but mostly our political leaders are ready to accept. The second lesson is the crucial importance of rooting very deep in the local environments, in the local populations. For the same reason as it is the best way to clearly understand so the cultural awareness, of course, but to better understand and create accesses in terms of local indicators that will gain enough confidence in your action to give you progressively access to the strategic information to the closest of the sensible enemy. So yeah, it's a question of anticipation and taking time, long time, and it's a question of deepening to the maximum in the roots of the locals in order to gain enough legitimacy and confidence. But yeah, Sahel, I mean, it's the sunset of Barkhane, but it's definitely not the sunset of the French effort, and especially the French special operations effort in Sahel, because I think that we will be still talking about this area within 20 or 30 years.
Thank you. So Commander Bruno, if I'm not mistaken, you also have experience on the ground in the Sahel. So what lessons from that experience do you think are applicable to resilience and resistance when considering challenges from state-based threats? Don't forget to unmute, Commander Bruno.
Yeah, I'm honestly, I find it a bit sad what we are doing right now in Sahel. I mean, as I said, resistance can be built without a network, an implication, the Clausewitzian Trinity, once again, very theoretical point of view, but without ground forces and a local partner that meets Clausewitzian Trinity. So we do what we do best, but as Lance said, once again, we would be speaking of Sahel in 20 or 30 years, because we don't have any partner there meeting the Clausewitzian Trinity in an area larger than 80 kilometers from the local capitals. So that's my point here. We can deploy much effort in doing that, but we must invest on a local partner and invest not only in military assets on a local partner, but in the development of the state, of infrastructures, and non-military domains. That's my my point of view, and that's the way I think this conflict can be solved by expanding the local states much further than the 80 or 100 kilometers surrounding the capitals. Don't know if I've been clear, sorry.
Thank you. And would you like to add one last point?
Yes, regarding resistance and resilience, I think the main points that are quite specific to France. I think the only other country in Europe which sees things in the same way is the United Kingdom. That is the French ability to take casualties. In Western Europe today, very few nations are capable of taking the level of casualty France or the UK has taken the UK in Afghanistan, or before that in Northern Ireland or other theaters, and France all over Africa or the Middle East for the past 50 years or so. We can lose soldiers on a regular basis without this becoming subject for a political crisis. And very few Western European nations can do that at the moment. So that I think is a very important point. And this is because of the specific link which exists between the president, who has very strong powers in France, and the military. Losing soldier is a tragedy, but it is not the end of the story. Also, so we have reached a sort of acceptable level of violence, and this means that we can go on for years without it becoming a political problem. Also, I think that if one thing that we've identified, and we've had it in other theaters before, but you have to be ready to be disappointed by friends and enemies alike, because attacks can come from any directions, and you never know what's the next disappointment will be. So do not lose heart, and this is a very important, it's a key point of resilience. We have to be able to withstand more than 2 presidential mandates, for example. The strategic patience is very important. And you have to remind yourself on a daily basis that not everybody likes you, even though you're losing people and you're spending a lot of money. And this is also a key tenet of resilience.
So thank you. We have just a couple minutes left for, I think, 3 more questions that are amazing questions. So we'll have to try and be really quick. So next question: French overseas territories and dependencies outside of Europe have the potential to provide geostrategic platforms for power projection in ways not always apparent to US geographic combatant commands. How can we better optimize planning and strategy development between the French Ministry of Defense and CPCO with non-EUCOM combatant commands?
Regarding this question, one issue we have with this is that there are so many different layers of commands in the US that sometimes it is difficult to identify the right one. Also, the turnover of commanding officer is quite quick compared to ours. So the building up of relationship and trust is an issue. And finally, to have secure means of comms, that sounds like should be no longer a problem, but still is a problem. So when all that is in line, it's much easier to communicate. And we found out on many occasions that French and US commanders see eye to eye, that they have full trust in each other. But at the intermediate and tactical level, they are not necessarily aware that this level of trust has been reached between the commanders. So this is another issue to make sure that things work more smoothly. It doesn't mean that it is not working smoothly as we speak, because we have a very good working relationship, including in the field for many, many years with instrumental US support in a number of fields. But it could be better. And regarding this question on French overseas possessions all over the planet, I think this is becoming more understood by a number of partners, especially with the tilt toward Asia. And for example, New Caledonia has been the subject of a lot of attention recently. And I think that the geostrategic situation of New Caledonia should clear up after the third referendum regarding the independence of this island, which is supposed to be completed this month. When we know where we go from there, I think that a number of things will be easier to deal with in that area.
Okay, so we have a few seconds for the next question. So France is one of the many countries participating in the Summit of Democracies currently underway in Washington, D.C. As America's oldest ally, what aspects of the democratic experience must we reinforce globally? And what is the role that SOF can play in building resilience in government institutions? You want to try 1 minute?
That's an easy one for 1 minute. I think that the role that SOF can play regarding building up resilience in government institution is in bringing the stark reality of what happens in the world directly to our leaders, to point out that there is such a huge gap between what some political leaders with limited real-world experience may think and what is really happening. And in my experience, even people with a very rosy view of the world, after a number of having been exposed to a number of real-world case studies and examples, tend to amend their views accordingly and maybe see things in a different light, in a way that could reinforce resilience, if not resistance, because it's difficult to talk about resistance, especially in countries that have known occupation in the not too distant past, because it brings back a lot of bad memories. So resilience is a good start.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we don't have time for the last question. So I really hope you enjoyed listening to a perspective from the other side of the pond. And for the American attendees, this was a perspective from your oldest allies. So thank you to the panelists. And thank you to Dr. Ike Wilson, the president of JSOU, and Dr. Scott Spitzen for trusting us and giving us the opportunity for this panel. Thank you very much, everyone.
Well, thank you for a brilliant panel.